Hello and welcome, Breakthrough Success listeners. I'm your host, Mark Guberti, and this is the podcast where you'll learn how to achieve the breakthroughs you've been looking for in your business and life. If you want to grow your content brand, you'll definitely want to add my latest book, Content Marketing Secrets, to your reading list. This book will teach you how to create, promote, and optimize your content for growth and revenue. You can get your copy at Mark Guberti, that is Mark with a C. So markguberti.com/book. And now, let's dive right into the show. For episode 81 of the Breakthrough Success podcast, we are going to talk about crafting an epic elevator pitch with our guest, John Livesay. John is a top sales expert and funding strategist with over 20 years of experience. He hosts the Successful Pitch podcast with investors from around the world and is the pitch mentor at startfast.net, the #1 accelerator in Upstate New York. John gives startups the pitching secrets to become irresistible to investors. And now it is my pleasure to welcome John to the show.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me.
John, it is such a pleasure to have you on the Breakthrough Success podcast. And before we dive into crafting that epic pitch, I'd love to get some backstory. So can you talk a little bit more about what first got you into sales?
Wow. What first got me into sales was I majored in advertising in college, and I was fascinated by what motivates people and persuades them to take action from a commercial standpoint. And I wanted to work in the world of advertising, where you would go pitch to get a client to hire your ad agency to do the campaign. But I got more intrigued with computers when I first got out of school and said, that seems to be the hot new ticket. So I went into the computer industry first before I ended up working for an ad agency, and got incredible sales training and realized that it's all psychological who decides when they're going to buy. In other words, people have to trust you and like you and know you before they buy from you.
John, thank you for sharing with us that backstory of what first got you attracted to sales. And with the elevator pitch, I mean, you've had a lot of investors on your show. You've had a lot of exposure to them and making pitches yourself. With all this in mind, what do you believe we need to say in our elevator pitches? I know this is a very case-by-case basis, but what are some of the things that just seem to apply to everyone?
Sure. Well, you know how everybody needs a good elevator pitch, and few people have one. And usually people go on and talk and confuse people, or worse, bore them. So I tell people I'm known as the pitch whisperer, and I help you go from invisible to irresistible, so you can get a great pitch, whether it's an elevator pitch or a pitch to get a new client or get funding. And once that happens, you become magnetic and you pull people in, and they either want to hire you or they ask you to say, that's interesting, tell me more, which is the whole goal of an elevator pitch.
John, thank you for sharing with us what we need to say in our elevator pitches. And I know that for a lot of people, they need to have multiple elevator pitches, because the pitch I'll make, for instance, to someone who could be a potential guest for my podcast is going to be a different pitch from what I tell a potential client for my coaching services. So how can we tailor our elevator pitches to different people who have different needs?
Well, the best way to tailor what you're saying is to have something in your opening elevator pitch that's intriguing. So for me, I say I'm the pitch whisperer, and I help people go from invisible to irresistible. Usually people say, well, what's a pitch whisperer? And I'll say, well, a pitch whisperer is someone who helps both people craft a pitch to get more sales, but it's also what I do as a keynote speaker. And they're like, oh, well, tell me more about your speaking, or tell me more about how you help people get more sales. And depending on what their answer is, I then go into the details. And I'll say, well, whether you're pitching to get hired or to get a new client or get your startup funded, there's really 3 unspoken questions that everybody has whenever they hear you pitch anything. And again, I stop talking. I've hopefully said something enough for them to go, well, what are those 3 unspoken questions? So does that help you figure out that you just say something enough that gets them to want to know more, and then you target and customize what it is you're talking about? So whether it's a podcast or a coaching, it's still over. I help people get great breakthrough success, and I do it through multiple ways, whether it's having people on my podcast, Breakthrough Success, or I help people experience that in their career. I mean, that would be an easy way to hit both, yes?
That is a really interesting approach because it's basically permission marketing, because you're saying what you are. You're the pitch whisperer who makes people go from invisible to irresistible. But then it's the person on the other end getting curious, and that's allowing you to expand more on your pitch. And I definitely find that approach very interesting, where you're having the other person, in a sense, pull the information out of you and making it more of a conversation rather than a one-sided pitch. But some people who they think about pitching to someone else, and for some people it could be really intimidating to do that. So how do we get more confident at speaking and sharing our elevator pitches?
Well, the best step to being more confident is to be more prepared. Arthur Ashe said the key to success is confidence, and the key to confidence is preparation. So you don't want to wing it. That's the first mistake a lot of people make, is they don't practice what they're going to say in an elevator pitch, and then it sounds, unorganized and all kinds of stuff. So I always tell people, practice so you have something ready to say, but you don't have to sound robotic when you're saying it. So I think that's the first step to being more confident, is to practice and be prepared. And then the second step is to do something I call stacking your moments of certainty, which simply means you write down 2 or 3 things when you nailed it, and you remembered when you asked somebody out on a date and got a second date, or got your first job, or whatever it was, and you put those moments of certainty in your head before you go pitch to get someone to hire you, or you pitch to get a new client, because that will increase your testosterone and lower your stress cortisol level when you stack your moments of certainty, as opposed to the negative self-talk that can go in.
So with that in mind, how do we get more confident at sharing our elevator pitches?
Well, the key to being more confident is preparation. Arthur Ashe said that the key to success is confidence, and the key to confidence is preparation. A lot of people think they can just wing it when they get up in front of someone to pitch for an interview, or to pitch to get a new client, or pitch to get funding. And nobody wings it in the world of sports or acting. They prepare before the camera rolls, or before their Olympic moment. And you need to do the same thing when you are getting your confidence built. And I have a technique I work with my clients on, where I have them stack their moments of certainty when they remember when they nailed it, whether it was a good date or a first job, and you put all those moments in your head and remember what that felt like, as opposed to the negative self-talk that can kick in if you're not prepared and you aren't in charge of what you're thinking before you go into pitch.
John, thank you for sharing with us how we can get more confident at sharing our elevator pitches. And this may seem like the same question, but it has a different edge to it. So I'm wondering how we can get more confident in the sense of face-to-face elevator pitches, because online pitches and face-to-face elevator pitches are 2 different things. So I was wondering how we can strengthen face-to-face specifically, and just a discussion about the differences between those 2 types of pitches.
Sure. When you're pitching something online or digitally, you have a lot of time to craft it, get other people to edit it, and really get it honed in, like an ad, a headline. And when you're with somebody face-to-face, whether it's pitching to get hired, or pitching to get a job, or pitching to get your startup funded, it's about you. And all the investors I've interviewed on my podcast, The Successful Pitch, tell me time and again, tell your clients to be human, not a robot, right? So that's why when when someone says to me at a networking event or whatever, what do? I start off conversationally. You know how everybody needs a good elevator pitch? Few people have one. Well, see, so that's what you do, is you make it conversational, and you don't think of it as an invitation for a monologue. It's a conversation.
And I do find this recurring theme very interesting. It's not like you're going on the podium or anything like that and just sharing and hoping that someone will pay attention and say, wow, I'd love to learn more. You're inviting that conversation. You're creating that sense of permission marketing. But when we do have these conversations at events, I mean, all conversations, they go for a certain period of time, then they end, and then the event ends. And You don't have that face-to-face interaction. So how do you get the conversation to continue beyond that first interaction?
Well, the best way to keep a conversation going is to create an open loop. Like, for example, when I said there's 3 unspoken questions people have when they hear you pitch anything, and then I stop. That's an open loop. That's people going, what are those 3 unspoken questions? I need to know. Oh, well, let's continue the conversation. Let's set up a time and we can go into them. Or let me give you one of them and I'll give you the other 2 in the next meeting when we have a phone call.
And what would you say specifically for people trying to market themselves at an industry event? How would we continue that conversation?
Well, again, I think it starts before you get to the event. For example, I recently took something called the Nerd Bird, which flew from Silicon Valley nonstop to Helsinki, Finland for an event called Slush that had over 20,000 investors and startups at the event, and 100 of them from Silicon Valley were on the private plane. And I reached out to the majority of those people on LinkedIn before I even got on the plane, so I could have a relationship and recognize who are the 10 people out of this 100 people out on the plane that I want to be sure I meet, and anyone else is just spontaneous. So that's how you start before you even get to the event. And then you make sure you follow up within 24 hours. Most people take cards and never do anything with them.
And I definitely agree about following up within 24 hours because the relationship's fresh right there, the connection's strong, and following up within 24 hours will definitely open the door to more opportunities. But the only way we're really going to hit upon the opportunities that we're going after is if we tap into our full potential. But that just seems like an area that very few people are able to do. So what do you believe holds most people back from reaching their full potential?
Well, I think the biggest mistake I see people making is the fear of rejection. And so if you're afraid to sell yourself, you're afraid to sell your company, you're afraid to ask for the order, you're afraid to, because you're so afraid of the no, that seems to be the biggest thing that holds a lot of people back from even wanting to be called a salesperson. And I think everyone's selling all the time. It may not be your title, but you sell yourself to get hired, to get promoted, to get people to join your team. It's just endless selling that's needed. And so if you have a fear of rejection, you're never going to go anywhere. And so my solution to that is to never reject yourself.
I really love that message of never rejecting yourself because there are others who may reject you, and some people could take that really hard, but you have to understand that rejection is part of the process, and as long as you don't reject yourself and you keep going, you're going to be okay. And rejection is just a part of the journey, as are the challenges that we'll have to face along the way. And with challenges in mind, I'm wondering, John, if you could share with us one big challenge you faced in your journey and a powerful lesson you learned during that challenge.
Sure. Well, after selling advertising at Condé Nast for 15 years, the economy tanked in 2008, and all luxury advertising, which is what I was involved with, pretty went down to zero. And they made the decision to lay off all the outside offices, and I was in LA, and 30% of the team in the New York corporate headquarters. So that was definitely disruptive. It felt like a needle on a record, whoa, what happened, right? And I had to not take it personally, realize that my identity was bigger than whether I had that particular job or not, and figure out how to reinvent myself. In fact, it's very similar to the actors that were in the silent movies. Some of them made it to talkies and some didn't. And it was a very similar situation for me, going from selling just print to learning how to sell digital ads. And so I think the big takeaway there is you either embrace disruption or you try to ignore it and are afraid of it. And if you embrace it, then you become like Netflix. And if you ignore it, you become like Blockbuster. And luckily for me, I was able to learn the new skills, get hired on how to sell digital ads at the Daily Beast. And then 2 years later, Condé Nast called me back and asked me to come back and sell print and digital. And I did, and ended up winning Salesperson of the Year for the company. And I realized at that moment, and that would be the big lesson I would love for people to have, is who you are is the same whether you're being laid off or winning an award. And so get off the self-esteem roller coaster by looking outside of yourself for your self-identity and self-worth.
John, thank you for sharing with us that big challenge you faced and a powerful lesson you learned during that challenge. And as I am a really big bookworm, I love asking this question to expand on my reading list and give my listeners some ideas of what they could read next. So, John, I was wondering if you could share with us 3 great business books that would really help us expand our brands and get more sales.
Well, I wrote one called The Successful Pitch, so that's one, I guess. But 3 others would be Tim Sanders' book, Deal Storming, all about collaboration, Jay Samet's book, Disrupt You, and Judy Robinette's book, How to Be a Power Connector.
John, thank you for sharing those 3 great book recommendations. I've asked you a lot of questions throughout this episode, and now I'd like you to ask us a question. So what is one question that you believe we need to be asking ourselves more often?
Am I good enough is a question that a lot of people have as negative self-talk. And so instead of asking yourself all the time, are you good enough to be hosting a podcast? Are you good enough to be asking for whatever it is you want to go for in life? I think the question you need to ask yourself is, what would it look like when I exceed my expectations of doing XYZ, hosting a podcast? Start reframing and asking yourself to visualize what it's going to look like in the future when you've achieved your goals, as opposed to being afraid of even taking the first step.
John, thank you for giving us that food for thought and for sharing all of your great insights throughout this episode. And before we go, for all the Breakthrough Success listeners wondering, where can we find you on the web?
My website's my name, John Livesay, L-I-V as in Victor, E-S-A-Y. My book's The Successful Pitch, as is the podcast. But if you can't remember any of that, just Google The Pitch Whisperer, and I'll come right up. And on Twitter, it's @John_, and Instagram is The Pitch Whisperer.
All right, Breakthrough Success listeners, those links and the show notes will be at markguberty.com/E81. John, it was such a pleasure to have you on the Breakthrough Success podcast.
Thanks, Mark.
To never miss an episode, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on whatever player you are using. If you are a regular listener and haven't done so already, I would greatly appreciate it if you could give this podcast a review or a rating. 2 ways you could do this are through markguberty.com/iTunes or markguberty.com/Stitcher. That ends this episode. Don't forget, dream big, achieve greatness, and unlock your potential today.
Want your tweets get retweeted to my 360,000 Twitter followers? All you have to do is say something nice about the Breakthrough Success podcast and include the link markguberty.com/iTunes. Once you've posted that tweet, email me, mark@markguberty.com, and I will retweet your tweet to my 360,000 followers.
This podcast is a production done by Mark Guberty. For more insights, head on over to markguberty.com.